Breaking, the Supreme Court has allowed states to ban transgender athletes from playing on girls' sports teams. It was a 6-3 ruling, and it reversed a lower court decision that had banned the laws in West Virginia and Idaho. The majority sided with the states that argued that the laws were to preserve fairness among women, and the dissenting judges argued that it was inherently discriminatory and unconstitutional. Although this case was specifically dealing with only 2 states, this will set the precedent for more than half the nation. 27 states have already enacted similar laws. This was obviously a major hit to the LGBTQ community, but it was expected with our conservative Supreme Court.
Just this morning, the Supreme Court handed down a ruling that upholds banning trans girls from participating in women's athletics. It is the last day of Pride Month. This is quite the blow for the community writ large, even for folks who don't participate in any level of sports. And depending on the language that I have not read yet, based on the opinion, this could become fodder for additional and new pathways that MAGA conservatives take to continue to restrict and limit what trans people are allowed to do. So, happy Pride.
Female sports are for biological females. What? To protect female athletes. It is not hateful, it is loving, and it is right. And this is what justice looks like.
Concerned Women for America and Young Women for America have worked on this issue for almost a decade. We recognized early on that this was going to be an issue that would impact young women in their safe spaces, on their sports teams, in their locker rooms, and we're so happy today.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So wonderful news this morning from the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court has ruled that states are allowed to ban men and boys from women and girls competitions. That it isn't unconstitutional for a state to say that girls sports is for girls, women's sports is for women. They are for females and you have to be female in order to participate. Idaho and West Virginia decided to take it all the way to the Supreme Court after losing their appeals and the lower courts deciding that it was unconstitutional to go against somebody's gender identity to acknowledge their biological sex and therefore ban them from competing in women's sports.
We just got a really important case about transgender athletes in student sports. And it does appear that here the Supreme Court says that states can bar transgender students from playing on girls' sports teams. So this is expected based on what we saw in oral argument, but it's the latest in a series of defeats for trans Americans amid political backlash, especially in conservative states. Now this is significant because roughly half of the states in this country have similar laws, but this is one of the big cases that we've been watching. We just got it. We didn't have a chance to go all the way through it, but it does appear that the Supreme Court is allowing states to ban transgender athletes from playing in girls' sports.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, you know, this in many ways is not a surprise given this high court. It has ruled against transgender care for minors. It has ruled in favor of the Trump administration when it comes to banning transgender people in the military, requiring birth sex and passports. Now, as you just reported, they're upholding these state bans or restrictions on transgender athletes playing. And also there's a political element of this. Of course, this is an issue that is enmeshed in the culture wars in America, even though a very small percentage of Americans are transgender.
That's exactly right. And the way this case came before the court, there were a pair of cases, one from West Virginia, one from Idaho. West Virginia one dealt with high school sports. The Idaho case dealt with a college athlete. And this case coming before the Supreme Court at this time, again, we watched an oral argument. It did not appear that they were going to be able to rule that these laws are unconstitutional based on the questions the justices were asking. So this is a significant case. This is, again, one of the biggest culture war cases that we're seeing.
This is what we anticipated after the oral argument. The justices appeared to view this as a matter left to the states. This is welcome news for many in the country. This is an issue that polls almost at 70% in favor of keeping sports to biological genders. So this is likely to really spur on other states to follow suit in terms of their own laws. It also reflects the fact that the court previously, in fact last year, said that transgender status is not a protected class in the sense of race or religion. So that is a consistent position. Particularly justices like Justice Barrett have been extremely outspoken on that point, saying that this is not going to happen, to treat transgender status as that same type of protected class. And during the argument, the litigators actually sort of tried to avoid that because they knew where the majority of the court was.
At least in part, from the majority opinion, it says sports are highly competitive and generally zero-sum. At almost every turn, someone wins and someone loses. Every athlete who makes a team takes a roster spot from another athlete, and every player who earns playing time reduces the playing time of a teammate. Every player who makes the starting lineup sidelines another who remains on the bench. They go on to say this, like every student who earns an athletic scholarship takes that opportunity away from another student, and so on. Women and girls who play sports care deeply about all of these things. They obsess about them. They spend extraordinary time and effort in the heat and in the cold to work out early in the morning and late at night to get a little faster, a little stronger, jump a little higher, shoot a little better, and it goes on from there. But essentially says they have to savor these athletic accomplishments and cherish them. And what these states have done here, they say they should be allowed to have these life-changing opportunities on an equal playing field without fear of physical injury from biological males or being forced to compete against biological males. They say consistent with Title IX, which we know was created to protect women's sports opportunities, and the Equal Protection Clause, we hold that the states may maintain women's and girls' sports for biological females. So big wins as we expected here for West Virginia and Idaho, and a recognition that there are differences in sports, and when you give a slot to someone else, it costs someone else. And in this case, they say women and girls should be protected from that. If these states choose to do that, they have a right to do so.
So the Supreme Court ruled that states can exclude transgender athletes from women and girls sports teams. The justices ruled unanimously that laws enacted by Idaho and West Virginia do not violate federal civil rights laws, but they were divided over whether the West Virginia law violates the Constitution, at least with regard to the athlete in the case before the court. So Justice Brett Kavanaugh, in his 29-page opinion, he wrote that consistent with Title IX and Equal Protection Clause, we hold that states may maintain women and girls sports for biological females. They may determine eligibility for women and girls sports based on biological sex. The Constitution and Title IX do not require an overhaul of women and girls sports throughout America. And then we had a dissenter, Justice Sotomayor, in an opinion joined by Justices Eleanor Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson. No surprises there. They contended that the majority extends great sympathy to those it favours, the young cisgender girls and women who play sports. I share that sympathy. Playing sports can lead to benefits that are immeasurable, and many are understandably invested in ensuring that competition stays fair and safe. Because the majority, however, inflicts a hardship on those it disfavours without giving them the fair and full opportunity the Constitution requires to litigate their contentions. I respectfully dissent. So the majority concluded that it doesn't go against the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause to ban male athletes who identify as transgender from competing in women's and girls' sports. So what the dissenters were arguing, led by Justice Sotomayor, was that the categorical bans target transgender youth for baseless discrimination and fail to consider individual circumstances such as hormone therapy or athletic abilities. So she's saying that not judging it on a case-by-case basis, as in the case of BPJ, who started competing in sports, at least in middle school, and who had undergone all of this, hormones and puberty blockers and all of that at a very young age, that somehow makes this person more qualified to compete in girls' sports. And, it's discrimination to not take that into consideration, apparently. Of course, there are a lot of other factors that need to be considered as well. Forcing girls to change in the locker room with this boy and other boys who claim to identify as trans. How can that be justified, especially as there were allegations against this individual saying that, he spoke inappropriately to the girls about their bodies and that sort of thing, using vulgar language. No girl should be subjected to that. Parents do not want their girls in locker rooms with boys. Of course, they didn't really go into that. Title IX affords rights to students, to participate in sports equally, to ensure that nobody is discriminated against and denied equal opportunities in sports based on their sex. For example, Justice Kavanaugh broke down the whole purpose of Title IX, saying prior to Title IX's enactment in 1972, the participation of the two sexes in American sports was badly skewed. In the 1971 to 72 school year, only about 300,000 high school girls played sports. Meanwhile, about 3.6 million high school boys played sports. The low female participation rate was the byproduct of overt sex discrimination, as well as mistaken stereotyping of American women and girls. Men and boys usually received more encouragement and more opportunities to play sports than women and girls. And male sports teams typically received more funding and resources than female teams. As of 1972, for example, women's sports reportedly accounted for only 2% of annual college athletic spending. In 1972, in a belated but historic response to persistent discrimination against women in educational institutions, including in athletics, Congress passed and President Nixon signed Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. Title IX prohibits discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So how does it make sense to now say that it's discriminating against boys to not allow them to compete against girls because of their gender identity, when that clearly is going to infringe upon fair and safe sports for girls? And he also went into the physical differences between men and women, between boys and girls. Of course, the likes of Sotomayor will say, well, BPJ, for example, has gone through puberty blockers and is on hormones. It should have been considered that this person should have the opportunity to compete against girls, to compete in line with his gender identity.
Hey, Marty, this is really a 6-3 decision along ideological lines. I mentioned a moment ago that we had some of the liberal justices concurring in part. They're just agreeing that one of the athletes' cases here was moot. But on this bottom line here of what states can do with their transgender athlete bans, it is all three liberal justices in dissent. And actually, just moments ago, Justice Sonia Sotomayor has just begun reading her dissent aloud in the courtroom. This is something we only see a handful of times each term. The justices reserve it for when they want to really express their strong disagreements in the case. But Justice Sotomayor, as we speak, in that courtroom behind me, reading her dissent. I'm just going to read you a bit from it. She says that this litigation implicates deeply sensitive, contentious, and evolving issues. These circumstances demand exercising judicial restraint, not rushing to answer conclusively difficult questions without sufficient evidentiary development. So all three liberal justices, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, in dissent today.
But the fact is, none of that turns a boy into a girl. You're still allowing boys to compete in girls' sports. And as I have argued, it will set a very dangerous precedent if they were to say, because this person has undergone all of these procedures, has been put on these drugs, that it's okay for him to now compete against girls. That incentivizes abuse against little boys, denying these boys from growing and developing as they should naturally, denying them going through puberty, stunting them for life without their consent. It encourages that. And I don't think the Supreme Court should have anything to do with that. But thankfully, they have made the right decision. The people who dissented, it's no surprise. President Trump said, "Big win. The United States Supreme Court just ruled against men playing in women's sports." Wow. That takes that ridiculous situation off the table. So, of course, it does uphold the rights of states to ban boys from girls' sports. However, They didn't go as far as to ban states from allowing it in the first place. So unfortunately, we're still going to see the likes of California, we're still going to see the likes of Maine continue this insanity, this injustice against women and girls. But this is a huge step in the right direction, and I'm really happy with this common sense decision. Of course, I don't like terminology like cisgender being used in the Supreme Court. I think all of that needs to be done away with, that we need to use accurate language. But the right decision was made in favour of women and girls. And once again, Title IX can do the job that it was designed to do, can fulfil the purpose that it was designed to fulfill, and not be used against the very people it was enacted to protect. Women and girls, they deserve fair and safe sports across all levels of sports. So let me know what you think about the decision. Let me know what you think about the different opinions that were put forward by the dissenters, for example. So thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video. And a huge thanks to all of those who have hyped my videos. It is greatly appreciated.